This version of Georgia is way too Jekyll and Hyde right now. I mean, it's honestly almost all centered around what we see at times from Carson Beck. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and we appreciate you coming to us from wherever it is you're coming to us from, whether that's via the podcast platform. We've seen the outpouring of support that we've seen on those forums. We appreciate you guys continuing to follow the show on there. We also appreciate those of you that are coming to us via the YouTube page. It's been awesome. We've had a really great October. We've had a really great September, millions of views throughout the course of both months, and we know that our best is yet to come as we move forward here in the 12-team playoff era into crunch time. Some teams on life support, some teams not. Some teams playing, starting to peak, some teams leveling off maybe a little bit. It's going to be fascinating to follow from this point forward, but what we do every week on Mondays is that we break down the weekend in a little bit of a unique way. We break it down from a sense of there's things that we've learned based on this past weekend. There's conclusions that we've come to based on this past weekend's games, and we're going to tell you about them here in just a minute. We're going to talk Penn State, Ohio State. We're going to talk about Georgia, Florida. We'll talk about Carson Beck and where he's struggling a little bit, why South Carolina and Texas A&M are not that dissimilar. And then we'll talk about some teams in our second half of the show that are they really that good? Are they going to go bowling? We'll give our rankings like we always do, and then we'll tip our cap to a couple teams that have already significantly overachieved this season. Ask you this every time. Like, rate, subscribe to the show wherever you get the show. Doesn't matter where. Doesn't cost you anything. No commitment is made. Just subscribe, and it'll be in your inbox when you pull up your podcast platform every time you sign on. So that's all it is. That's all we ask for, and we appreciate you guys that have been able to do that. Start by kicking things off with the biggest game of the day there in State College, and tell you a little bit about what we learned about Ohio State. Ohio State just won on the road and played their C game. That's our first takeaway. You know how hard that is to do? And I think those of us that have played, having played in games like that, top 10 matchups, top 5 matchups on the road, hostile situations, getting the other team's best shot, feeling like it's desperation mode, now or never. Like, I've played in those games. I remember what it was like, and it was really flipping hard. It's hard to play in environments like that. And oftentimes, in order to win in places like that, you got to play at least your B-plus game. In some cases, it requires your A game. And in some cases, you might play your A-minus game and still not win. That's how hard it is to go on the road in conference when a team's had you circled all off season. And Ohio State just did it and played, honestly, not very well. That's what's amazing about this performance. Now, there were some big missed opportunities in this game, and I'm going to give you a series of missed opportunities that Ohio State had that could have blown the doors off of Penn State, okay? Couple of massive misses in this game. 1st and 10, their offense is in plus territory. Carnell Tate is right down the right sideline, and Will Howard throws him out of bounds. Good news is you don't let those missed opportunities fester. That's what I think was amazing about what Ohio State did this weekend is that, yes, they left a lot of plays on the field. But guess what? If they missed them, they overcame them a play or two later. So they missed that throw down the right sideline. It's early in the game, going right to left, throws to the right sideline, out of bounds. It's not the end of the world because 2 plays later on 3rd and 5, they take advantage of a busted blitz coverage. They hit Trevion Henderson on the wheel out the right. 1st down. 2 plays after that, they have the throwback for the touchdown to the left-hand side. All right. That's overcoming adversity. That's overcoming missed opportunities. Then a little later in the game, 2nd quarter, 2nd and 5, Will Howard's rolling to his right. Quinshon Judkins is open. It's an accurate throw. Judkins drops it. No big deal. Well, guess what? Couple plays after that, it's 4th and 1. They convert, right? They fumble it over the pylon. Will Howard They force a punt 6 plays later. Early in the fourth quarter, they're up 17-13. This thing is on the verge of being done. Ball's around midfield. Jeremiah Smith gets behind the defense, loses the ball, can't locate it. It looks like it's overthrown. He kind of stops running, can't really locate it. Had J.J. Smith located it, he catches it. It's 24-13, and at that point, it's all she wrote. I think this is pretty the people will sit there and say and nitpick and say, well, you know what? I just gave you a handful of examples. Is that a sign of a good team that they miss so many opportunities? Some may say no. They miss too many opportunities. They don't capitalize enough. So therefore, they're really not a great team. With Ohio State knowing the pressure that they have to play with and knowing the expectation level surrounding the program, I think the ability to weather the storm, make mistakes, leave plays on the field, and still win tells you all you need to know about where the program is currently at. And there was another thing, too. I've seen a bunch about Will Howard's performance. Was it good? Was it bad? Was it average? Was it excellent? I mean, I've seen kind of a range of assessments about how he played and how they can build on his performance, what have you. I'll say a couple things here. One, I thought Will Howard played a rock-solid football game. Did he miss some throws? Yes. Did his receivers not help him out a couple times? Yes. I just referenced 2 drops, one by Jeremiah Smith, the other by Quinshon Judkins that could have been big plays. And in the J.J. Smith situation, it would have been a touchdown. Yes, there were plays left on the field. But I want you to go and look up one play that will help you understand the importance of what Will Howard did in this offense. It was 15 seconds left. In the third quarter, it's 1st and 10. There's pressure in his face. He drifts back just a little bit. He puts a beautiful touch pass over the top to J.J. Smith. He catches it, and they now have flipped the field because that right there could have very easily been a sack. That could have very easily been a tipped pass. It could have been an incompletion. And next thing you know, the crowd is back into it on 2nd and 10. Instead, it's a big play created all because of Will Howard's touch that he put on the ball. He also pulled the ball, put the game on ice when they were selling out against the run. He pulls it, gets around the left, slides down, game, set, match. I thought Will Howard played a smart football game and a rock-solid football game. And while I don't think they can ride Will Howard en route to a national championship, you can win a lot of football games if he plays the way he played in that game. Rock-solid C game, tons of missed opportunities. But you got to feel good about surviving on the road against a desperate Penn State team that had this one circled for the better part of the last 8 months. Let's go to takeaway number 2. Penn State isn't as good as Ohio State. And it's about time that everyone starts to just acknowledge that. And by the way, you can listen to the media. You can listen to the mainstream media that wants to build this thing up on an annual basis. I'm all for that. I'm great with that. I couldn't wait to turn on Fox and watch that game at noon Eastern time last weekend. I was super excited about it. I'm sure I haven't seen the rating yet. I'm sure there were millions upon millions upon millions of people that tuned in to watch Penn State, Ohio State. But we're fooling ourselves if we're putting these 2 programs in the same category. Like, why do we continue to do this? Guess what? I'm as much to blame as anybody else. This is not me projecting onto people, but this is me acknowledging that the media, because we are so desperate to see Penn State and to see parity in the Big Ten, we put Penn State into that same playing field as Ohio State, and they just don't belong in that playing field right now. That Penn State just played the most human version of Ohio State that they've seen in quite some time. Quite some time. And yet they still couldn't get it done. Now, if you look at the series history, okay, Penn State won the first 4 meetings against Ohio State. Every single one of those came before 1964. They won 6 of their first 8, but since 1980, which is nearly a decade before I was born, they've played 32 times, and Ohio State is 25-7. And what's amazing, and really in the modern era, which is what matters most, is it not? In the modern era, Penn State's beaten Ohio State 4 times since 2022. 4 times they've beaten them. In 2005, Ohio State turned it over 3 times. They were -3 in the turnover margin. And guess what Penn State did with those turnovers? They scored 17 points en route to an upset victory. In 2008, Ohio State had a -2 turnover margin. Penn State scored 13 points in that game. In 2011, they beat them. But guess what? Ohio State was 6-7 that year. It was like the one black eye year in the history of Ohio State football, at least in my lifetime, it feels like. And then in 2016, it required a blocked field goal return to the house to win. And if you go back and watch that play, it should have been a flag because their defensive tackle literally tackled the guard, which allowed the Penn State player to penetrate, block the field goal, and they return to the house. Like every year we just pretend like they're on the same level. They're not. And honestly, it's not close. And it hasn't been since the 1990s. They go out and they hire Andy Kotelnicki this year, and I have a ton of respect for Andy Kotelnicki. I think he's a great offensive coordinator, but it's the personnel gap. There's a massive gap in personnel that Ohio State has and Penn State has. You can tell me it doesn't exist. You're wrong, and that's okay. First drive was awesome. 14 plays right out of the gate. Then they get to within striking distance of the end zone, and they get an eligible man downfield because they decide to pull it on an RPO, throw it away. Now it's 1st and 15 from the 17. You just can't do that against Ohio State. You can't under any circumstances. You're leaving points on the field. You're leaving plays on the field. This is Ohio State we're talking about. You're not playing against a mid-level team like Maryland. Okay, this is Ohio State. All right, you have to execute at a high level, and to have 5-yard penalties because of issues on an RPO is inexcusable. All right. They end up settling for 3. They follow that out with a 3 and out. They follow that out with a 3 and out. So 2 consecutive 3 and outs after a 14-play drive that got them 3 points out of the gate. By the way, they have a 10-point lead because of the pick 6. You have a fumble by Will Howard over the pylon that we referenced earlier. They went on to gain 30 yards on that drive on 6 plays, had to punt it away. Then on 1st and goal from the 3, they throw a pick, which, by the way, I'm not totally upset about the decision to throw it on that situation at all, because what's the likelihood of that ball getting intercepted? It's not. It's kind of an unlucky bounce, but it was what it was. But there was a critical moment in the game. And this kind of speaks to just discipline and mistakes that were made. It was early in the second quarter. It was 3rd and 11. They're up 10-7. Penn State gets a stop. But Elliott Washington steps over the running back. They flag him for 15 yards. They extend the drive. Next thing you know, Ohio State scores a touchdown a few plays later. And then you go into the goal line stand. First down, handoff up the middle. No problem with it whatsoever. All right. Second down, handoff up the middle. Almost scored, by the way. I saw people criticizing, well, why is the offensive lineman in motion? Like they've done that for a while. That's not a new offensive play. It's pretty standard, to be honest with you. And I don't have an issue with it whatsoever if you would have actually done what you needed to do here on 3rd down. Watch that 2nd down play again. Watch the handoff up the middle and watch the defender at the top of the screen, how fast that defender crashes to try to be impactful there on the downhill run. The quarterback has to see that. The offensive coordinator has to see that. That end man on the line of scrimmage that crashes down to take away the run. Because guess what they did on 3rd down? The exact same play. Guess what they should have done on 3rd down? They should have allowed Aller to read that, pull the ball, and he walks in for a touchdown. Walks in for a touchdown. No question whatsoever. The motioning offensive lineman could have secured the edge. Aller, with one leg or not, could have scored on that play. 4th down, they threw it. Penn State, I didn't have a problem with the play call. They're like, throw it to Tyler Warren. Did you see Tyler Warren? He was totally covered at the top of the screen. They also double covered the receiver that they did throw it to. But either way, 4th down was whatever. But 3rd down was when that drive was stymied because they did not recognize how the end man on the line of scrimmage played. Critical moments, you have to recognize things like that. And it was terrible. If they would have just looked at the end of the line of scrimmage it's a walk-in touchdown. Instead, they didn't. They handed off up the middle again. They get stopped again. They end up having the goal line stand, and Penn State falls up short. We always seemingly act like Penn State and Ohio State are playing with the same weapons, with the same caliber of player. They are not. And that's okay, because I still have a lot of respect for what Penn State's program is. But this constant disappointment about Penn State's performance, we need to factor in the fact that their program hasn't been where Ohio State's program is for a really long time. And to expect that just to change immediately is highly unlikely. One final thought on this game, I might add. Ohio State, Penn State, I thought it was really poorly officiated. I thought it was way too physical on the perimeter. There should have been flags all over the place for pass interference on both sides of the ball. I personally like when they allow guys to play, but too much was too much at times in that game, and it disrupted the flow all over the place. So I digress. Great game to watch, highly entertaining game to watch, but man alive, if I'm Penn State, if I can't beat that version of Ohio State at home with the personnel I have this season, I don't know when it's going to happen. Takeaway number 3, South Carolina and Texas A&M are similar teams, but man, the perception's different. And then you really look at kind of where South Carolina and Texas A&M are. And South Carolina did a great job of creating a remarkably hostile environment. I mean, from start to finish in that game, it felt like the roof was going to just explode. Felt like there was going to be an earthquake there in Williams-Brice. It was amazing. From the beginning all the way through, they never really let up. And Texas A&M, they walked into a buzzsaw now. I mean, they walked in, and South Carolina goes right down the field, scores. South Carolina gets the ball again, goes right down, scores. Next thing you know, I mean, they blinked their eyes a couple times, and they're in a 14-0 hole. And you're sitting there thinking like, oh, man, I mean, this could get sideways in a hurry. Didn't we just see this a couple years ago where Tennessee went on the road to South Carolina, lost the game convincingly when at the time they were the number 5 team in the country? Like, this had so many parallels in the early going. And then Texas A&M, boom, they stopped the surge. They stopped the bleeding. They go down, get a field goal. They eventually get to the point where they are tied 20-20, and they climb their way back in. I think when you look at these two teams, one team was thought by many to be a team that would be very fortunate to get to a bowl game this year. The other team, we're talking about SEC championship, college football playoff, maybe even in some circles, a national championship. But when you really look at the teams and you kind of line them up and say, all right, well, South Carolina has this, A&M has that. South Carolina has this, A&M has that. You kind of go through it, and they're actually quite similar, which speaks to where we're at right now in college football in the 12-team playoff era. You're almost entirely dependent on how you fare in critical moments in the game. Because guess what? The gaps between teams right now have never been more thin in the Southeastern Conference. There's a reason why we have seen a team like South Carolina and Vanderbilt at times play up and at times play down to the level of the competition. To see South Carolina struggle, I'm talking struggle, with Old Dominion in the first game of the year, and then to pound Texas A&M to the tune of nearly 300 yards rushing, those are very, very different performances. Very different performances. To see South Carolina go on the road and dominate Kentucky in week 2, only to see them to get crushed by Ole Miss later in the season. Same team, vastly different results. The parity across the board is unbelievable in the SEC, and we saw it this past weekend because A&M, great defensive line, take over the game defensive line. South Carolina has that too. Young, talented, athletic quarterback. Well, South Carolina also has that with Marcel Reed and Lenoris Sellers. Two teams that really pride themselves on being super physical and trying to run the football. Both teams do that. But the perception is that Texas A&M's offensive line's all world and that South Carolina's not very good because they've given up 32 sacks Yeah, but if you stay on schedule and they run the football and your quarterback's not dropping back in an obvious passing situation, then it's not that bad. The other thing I would say, too, is Lenora Sellers for South Carolina, we're going to see some really good football from him in his career. Really good football. Now, he's just getting started, and he's still a young guy, and I still think he's trying to figure out how to kind of operate at highest levels of football with caliber of speed and attention to detail and response and all this stuff. I think we're seeing from him a growth and a learning curve that when he figures this thing out, look out. It's going to be a huge problem, because how many times in the game did we watch a Texas A&M defender get hands on Lenora Sellers, looking like it's going to be a loss of 7, 8, 9 because they sacked the quarterback, only to see him shed, evade, create, and take off. There was at one point in the game, Lenora Sellers was pressured on 8 of his 15 dropbacks. In those 8 pressures, there were 0 sacks. And in those 8 pressures, there were also 5 scrambles for 30-plus rushing yards for Lenora Sellers and 1 completion for like 17 or 18 yards as well. A&M had him dead to rights multiple times, and yet it didn't matter. So South Carolina, their best football is coming on the offensive side, and yet they might have gotten there last week. But if you're A&M, there's still everything in front of you, but you got to tackle better. You got to be much, much better, I think, on the defensive side of the football, because that was very uncharacteristic defensive performance from a Mike Elko coach team. But the good news is I think they can improve, because it was a difficult situation that they were thrust into, and I would expect a better performance here in the weeks to come. Takeaway number 4. Oregon right now is the most complete team, and I'm beginning to think it's really not that close. Now, they just became the unanimous number 1 for the first time in school history. They just handed Michigan their worst home loss since 2020. Dylan Gabriel continues to look like one of the best, if not the best, quarterbacks in the country. 22 of 34, 294, a couple touchdowns. Also, like last year, and we've seen this throughout his career, timely runs. You have that 23-yard touchdown run there in the third quarter that extended the lead and made it feel in some ways insurmountable. But in this performance, like, we know they can score. I'm not sure anybody was that concerned about Oregon being able to score at full strength. But they weren't at full strength in this game. Tez Johnson goes down, hurts his right shoulder collarbone there in the first quarter, was out the rest of the game. He's been the go-to guy in the passing game at times this year. Not even just this year, dating back to last year too. I mean, Bo Nix was always looking in the direction of Tez Johnson. He's been their punt return guy. That was felt, because when you put in Ryan Pelham, you fumble. Not great there. That led to Michigan's first touchdown of the afternoon. But on offense, Trayshawn Holden steps up at wide receiver, and he goes for a career best. The guy goes for 150 yards. Now, Michigan was without Will Johnson. They were banged up in the secondary, but still, usually when you lose a guy like Tez Johnson, that's a really difficult piece to replace, and Oregon just did it, no problem whatsoever. Trayshawn step up, boom, continue to feed their wide receiver core. That was super impressive. And what I also appreciated too is that you knew the game plan for Oregon in this game. Everyone could have told you, sell out against the run, make Michigan try to beat you through the air, and let's see if they can do it. Well, how many times did Michigan, a team that really seldom gives up lost yardage plays because they run downhill, how many times did they get tackled behind the line of scrimmage? 7 of their 28 rushing attempts were tackled behind the line of scrimmage. I mean, penetration, getting them behind the sticks, and selling out against the run. Now, Davis Warren hit a couple downfield throws, but not enough to be able to make this game any more dramatic than it needed to be. Now, what's going on for Oregon moving forward? Yeah, there's some tricky matchups, I think. When you look at it, they're hosting Maryland this week, should handle them with relative ease. You got a road trip to Wisconsin, but at this point, Wisconsin's coming back to earth. And anytime they play anyone that's any good, it feels like Wisconsin doesn't match up very well. And they have their game against Washington. there at the very end. So while the rivalry game against Washington is somewhat unpredictable, I'd be pretty surprised if Oregon's not sitting there 12-0 heading to the Big Ten championship game as an undefeated team. So either way, Oregon's in a great spot. Feel really optimistic about what we've seen from them. Takeaway number 5. Georgia wins again, but until they clean some things up, they're not going to win the whole thing. I mean, Georgia's expectation levels to win the national championship, right? Even by Georgia standards, winning the SEC championship, getting to the playoff, anything less than a national championship, anything less than a semifinal appearance, anything less than that by Georgia standards feels like a bit of a disappointment, given with what they've accomplished the last few years. Even what they accomplished last year where they were left out of the playoff and yet still had many people in the postseason convinced that Georgia was the very best team. I'm not going to get into that argument. That doesn't do us any good. Who cares about last year? I'm talking about this year. But this version of Georgia is way too Jekyll and Hyde right now. I mean, and it's honestly almost all centered around what we see at times from Carson Beck. There's really no better indicator of where Georgia's at than their quarterback's decision-making. Now, are there some good things in there? Oh my goodness. Like, there are so many great things that Carson Beck does throughout the game. There's 3rd and 7, games tied at 20, fourth quarter. You see zero pressure from Florida. He sees a matchup that he could take advantage of with Arian Smith. Hits it, 34-yard conversion. Like, we see that, and we're like, wow, that's big time. That's what you want. I mean, that's the veteran guy, the 5th-year senior, the guy that's been around for a long time, that has seen a lot of football, cool, calm, composed on a 3rd and long, identifying pressure, getting to a check, and taking advantage of that check. I mean, he threw for 300-plus yards this weekend. He's averaging this year more passing yards per game than he did a year ago. But that's the good part of the conversation. The bad part, he's now had 3 straight games in which he's had multiple interceptions. Now, I'll excuse the last one because he was getting hit. Okay, I'll excuse the last one. That one's fine. You get hit and the ball flutters up and they pick it off. It happens. It's hard for me to always put that one on the quarterback. It's not. As a guy that played the position, I know how hard that is. Like, that one's not on him. But let's go to the other 2. Okay, the first play, the first interception. It's just a bad offensive play call. I think you should have thrown it away. Sometimes the OC and the DC is going to make the correct defensive call, and the OC is going to get got. That happens. It happens probably 12 to 15 times a game, maybe more, depending on the DC and the OC matchup. So sometimes the defense wins, right? It happens. It happens all the time. What you can't do is allow their win on that one play to become an emphatic victory by throwing it into traffic and turning the ball over. Because turnovers are what change the game, especially when you're the more talented team like Georgia is almost every single time they get off the bus. You look at that play, you don't like it. It's kind of a confusing coverage. It looked like Florida might have even busted on the left side of the coverage. Throw it away. Live to play the next down. It's no big deal. And we haven't seen that enough from Carson Beck. He's also pretty good with his legs. So extend time, buy time, go. But either way, you can't throw it into traffic. Can't do it. Second interception. You're looking at the play. All right, it's 3rd and 6, 7, whatever it is. It's 9, whatever. It's 3rd down. And right now, you have a play where it's a little underneath hitch by the slot, Lawson Lucky, and a wraparound dig in behind it. That's the other one. I don't recall who the receiver was. He tries to throw it there, but guess what? There's a defender that's right there. You got 2 defenders right there. Throw it to Lucky. He's 5 or 6 yards downfield. Maybe he breaks a tackle. Maybe he turns up field, goes and gets the first down. If not, he's tackled, and guess what? You got a 4th and 3 to consider, or a 4th and 2 to consider because he's a big tight end, and he's probably not going to fall backwards. Just take the underneath. take what the defense gives you. And right now it feels like sometimes he doesn't trust the receiver. He doesn't trust the progression. He is predetermining where he's going with the football. He's letting the naysayers about, well, his draft stock, all this stuff. Just take the progression. Take what the defense gives you, and eventually they'll give you the game. But I look at the defense, too, from Georgia, man. There's been issues there, too. Georgia's got a lot to clean up. And their ceiling is as high as anybody. And it might be the highest in college football. If they play their best game against Oregon's best game, I don't know who wins. It's a great, great conversation that we can have if we get there. But my goodness, they're not going to get there if they keep having critical errors on critical downs and distances. The good's good, but the bad's been real bad. We need to see a little less bad if Georgia's going to get where they want to go. Takeaway number 6, we just want to give a little shout out here, all right? Let's hear it for some teams that are going bowling. I know that with all the focus that has now gone into the postseason and chasing championships, like I understand. I care a lot about the playoff. But for some programs, we have to celebrate when they become bowl eligible because it just doesn't happen very often. And we're going to do that here on this show. And we'll probably do it every week. Teams that punch their ticket to bowl eligibility should feel great about the opportunity to play in the postseason. And you could say that we support participation trophies. You can say that we do this, we do that. I really don't care. Because for Vanderbilt to get to 6 wins is a tremendous achievement. They haven't done it since 2018. They go on the road and they beat Auburn at Auburn for the first time ever. And this is the first time that Vanderbilt has beaten Auburn and Alabama in the same season since 1955. That was before Bear Bryant was the head coach of the Crimson Tide. So let's give some love to Vanderbilt, man. Going to the postseason, what just an incredible accomplishment. Should feel great about them. And guess what? They're not done. Vandy's got South Carolina this week. They got Tennessee. Like, there's still a lot left on the bone for Vanderbilt. Remember, they had no business losing to Missouri. They had no business losing to Georgia State. They lost 2 games that are almost unthinkable now looking back at how it all went down. Vanderbilt really only has 1 game in which they were convincingly beat, or should have been convincingly beaten. That was Texas. And I know they lost that game by 3, but if you really watched it, it felt like more. So Vandy, man, they get to bowl eligible. They should be excited. Congratulations to Clark Lee and the Commodores. Arizona State, they became bowl eligible the first time since 2019. Last year, guys, they finished 3-9. That was their final season in the Pac-12, and things have flipped immediately. Cam Scatterbo, he rushed for $153 and a touchdown, caught 4 passes for 121 and a couple scores. They routed Oklahoma State on Saturday night. They're now 6-3, 3-2 in the Big 12. They outscored Oklahoma State 21-7 in the second half after the long weather delay, and they also held the ball for nearly 40 minutes. So that's pretty dang good. They also, if we're going to take it one step further, they held Oklahoma State to just 84 yards rushing. And the fact that Ollie Gordon in the first half had just 6 yards on 6 carries shows just how far Arizona State has come. So incredible performance from Kenny Dillingham. Incredible job by Arizona State this year. Have a ton of respect for Kenny Dillingham and what he inherited there to be 6-2 and be going to the postseason. That is an unthinkable task with what he stepped into for sure. And then Minnesota, going bowling for their 4th straight year. So got to give some love there. They beat Illinois. How Illinois at the time was still ranked is beyond me. But either way, that's a ranked win. And they now have matched their win total from a year ago. It's also their largest road win for Minnesota against an AP-ranked opponent since they beat number 6 Ohio State in Columbus by 12 back in 2000. So very happy for Minnesota. They're going bowling yet again. Speaking of bowling, takeaway number 7. Will these teams make the postseason? We will start with Nebraska. This team was 5-1 just a couple weeks ago. And we have seen this story before, and I hate that we've seen this story as often as we have, but here we are again, fresh off what was a convincing loss to UCLA. Dylan Raiola gets hurt in the game. They are now 5-4. And you're going to say convincing loss, they lost by 7. They were down. It was a backdoor close loss. It was a convincing loss if you watch it. They were 5-4 now with games remaining that are not all a slam dunk. Okay. They're at USC. It'll be a difficult game. SC, talk about them here in just a second. They have Wisconsin coming to them. That might be the one they have to win to get to bowl eligible. Do you think Nebraska can beat Wisconsin at home? I think they can. I hope they can, but it's not a guarantee. And then they're at Iowa. So they need to win one of the next 3. 2 of those 3 are on the road against a desperate SC team and against a really improved Iowa team, especially on the offensive side of the football. Michigan is up next. They are currently 5-4. Lose again this past weekend, but no shame in losing to Oregon. It is what it is. But look at what's remaining. Road trip to Indiana, road trip to Ohio State. Do you guys feel confident in Michigan winning those 2 games? I personally don't, but I do think they can get Northwestern at home. I would be surprised if they didn't, but if they don't, they will miss a bowl game and cap off one of the worst seasons in FBS history by a defending national champion. So Michigan 5-4, I think they'll get to the postseason. Feel pretty good about it. USC, they are currently 4-5 with a home game against Nebraska, a game that feels like they have to win if they want to get to the postseason, and then a road trip to UCLA. Feels like they got to win the next 2 because they got Notre Dame coming to town in the final week of the regular season. And while Notre Dame, at that point, could Notre Dame be reading their press clippings? I don't think so. I think Notre Dame knows they need an emphatic victory in that game if they want to even be considered for a home field game in the postseason. So I think Notre Dame will not just win, but they will try to run it up if they can. So they better beat Nebraska this week, and they better win on the road at UCLA the following week if USC wants to go to the postseason. Oklahoma, they are currently 5-4. They have made a bowl game in 25 consecutive seasons, but the next 3 games are no guarantee. They're on the road at Missouri. Feels like the one they probably have to win. If they can get the game at Missouri, Missouri's not very good. They're reeling a little bit. But if they can get that one, they're obviously good. But do you feel confident in them beating Bama at home or at LSU? I personally don't. So it feels like this is the week. Oklahoma's got to get it against Missouri because beating Bama at home or at LSU feels a lot less likely. So if they don't get it this week, that bowl streak of 25 straight could come to an end. Florida's 4-4. They're at Texas. LSU comes to them. Ole Miss comes to them, and they're at Florida State. They got to get 2 of the next 4. I actually think they can get there, but it feels pretty unlikely. I think it can happen, but I think it's unlikely, especially given the uncertainty right now surrounding their quarterback situation. How about Utah? Utah is 4-4. They've lost 4 in a row. They have BYU this weekend at home. They're at Colorado. Iowa State comes to them before they finish up the season by going to UCF. You confident in them getting a split in the next 4 games? Well, their next 3 are against ranked opponents, and I think the most gettable is on the road. I don't think it's likely. Utah, the preseason favorite to make it to the Big 12 championship and to make the playoff for the first time in Kyle Whittingham's tenure, doesn't appear like it's moving in the right direction. Then finally, Washington. Played in the national championship last year. Now here they are sitting at 5-4. They got to go to Penn State this week. That feels like a challenging one. Can they win it? Perhaps, but it feels challenging for sure. UCLA comes to them. Better get that one because they go to Oregon the final week, and it's not likely that they're going to get the Ducks this year, and knowing that they got the Ducks twice last year. So they better hope that they're not looking ahead because that sandwich game, UCLA just beat Nebraska convincingly between Penn State and Oregon road trips, feels extremely difficult. So Washington, I think they get there, but it certainly won't be easy. Takeaway number 8. We're going to play a little game here. All right. Answer the question. How good are they? Simple as that. How good are they? We'll start with Miami. Now, Miami, they've now added a ranked win to their resume with Louisville's win this past weekend. Louisville now in the top 25. Miami also has a win against 6-3 Duke, 5-4 Virginia Tech. Everyone else that they've played is 500 or below. I look at Miami, and the thing that amazes me is it's like when they rev their engine, they go, and it's all she wrote. Done. You're not beating them. The problem is I don't seemingly get that 60-minute performance very often. I got it against Florida, but that was about it. I want to see Miami for 60 minutes play the way they're capable of playing, and then I'll feel a lot better about them making a deep run here in the college football playoff. But they're going to get in. I expect them to win out. I think they're going to be 12-0 when they get to the ACC title game, where they'll probably face SMU, depending on how things go for the Ponies. But I think Miami is good. I do. I just think they're very inconsistent on the defensive side of the football. Let's go next to Indiana. Indiana's sitting there undefeated, and because they're not some name brand, people are still having a tough time getting on board with what Indiana has accomplished. Now, I look at their resume and I'm underwhelmed. Their best win is against Nebraska or Washington. Take your pick. Both teams are a combined 10-8. So neither team's really all that good, 5-4 each. But they've won all 9 games by 14 or more points. That's only the 6th time that's ever happened in the Big Ten. They've scored 40-plus in 7 straight games. That's the most by any FBS team this season and the most in the season in school history. So while I look and I acknowledge that the teams they've played against aren't great, I also have to look at how they've played against those teams. And it's not just on one side of the ball, I might add. They're doing it with their defense as well. So I think Indiana's really good, but I am a little bit curious to see how things will go when they play against a team coming up like Ohio State or even like Michigan this week. I think they're considerably better than Michigan. I do. But Ohio State, we're going to find out all we need to know. Can Ohio State get it? Sure. Can Indiana get it? Absolutely. But I wonder if we are falling victim to our assessment of Indiana, a little bit like several fell victim on the assessment to Clemson. Like Clemson was beating the brakes off everybody, but nobody they beat was really very good. And they play a halfway decent Louisville team, and look what happens. Notre Dame. Are they good? I think Notre Dame's really good, by the way. Like I watch them and people will continue to beat the drum about NIU. I get it. I am not some Notre Dame homer or apologist, but they had one bad game. They've beaten Louisville. They've beaten Texas A&M. Georgia Tech's above 500. They beat Navy. I think the shine's kind of off that performance, but I just watch how many times they hit Tyler Shuck. I watch how many times they harassed other quarterbacks, how they've had to kind of weather the storm. They've had some guys that were injured. I look at how they're running the football, how Riley Leonard continues to get more comfortable. Like I think Notre Dame's very real this year. Can they win the national championship? I don't know if I'm going to go that far, but I do think that this is a really good football team, regardless of what their resume or regardless of what their record would tell you at the moment. And then finally, it's Tennessee. Now, I think a lot has been made about Tennessee's poor starts in football games. They've been poor in the first half of football games multiple times. They have 3 wins against teams that are above 500. One is Oklahoma, who's 5-4. One is NC State, who is 5-4. I don't think either of those 2 teams are very good, but I do think Alabama's pretty good. And they do have a win against Alabama, and that should be acknowledged. Plus, when I watch Tennessee, I just feel like there's more there. I feel like they're constantly taking their shots offensively. I feel like they're constantly trying to push the ball downfield. They're trying to manufacture big plays. If they just were a little bit more methodical, I feel like they could run some teams out of the gym. We just don't see that all the time. So that might be something worth tweaking, but I think Tennessee's really good as well. So to sum things up, everyone I just listed, I think is really good. You don't get to this point of the season with a really good record and not be a pretty good football team. You might have flaws, but I do think all those teams are solid. It's just how many are actual national championship contenders. That's what we'll find out here in the next couple weeks. Takeaway number 9. November is about to be incredible if you are a college football fan. And I just look at like the laundry list of matchups, whether it's Tennessee at Georgia in a couple weeks, Indiana at Ohio State, in a couple weeks. Notre Dame at SC, Texas at Texas A&M. The rivalry weeks that we'll have on the last week and Thanksgiving weekend. All right, all those games are awesome, but there are several others like BYU, Utah, that are kind of getting lost in the shuffle. But two this week that are just off the charts good as far as matchups, intrigue, questions, playoff implications, conference championship standing. Georgia at Ole Miss this week is going to be amazing. I know not a lot of people have paid a ton of attention to Ole Miss the last couple of weeks. They lost to LSU, and I think people maybe they took a week off. They played last week, but that was up against Penn State, Ohio State. So I think most people were probably watching that. Ole Miss has kind of found something a little bit with throwing it a little quicker, getting the ball out a little faster. They won last week at Arkansas, a team that's above 500. They won convincingly, almost doubled them up, scored 1 million points in the process without their best offensive player in Trey Harris, who's expected back this week to take on a Georgia team that has at times looked a little susceptible in the secondary. Like Georgia looked pretty human on defense this past weekend. But we know when Georgia revs their engine like they did against Texas, look out. And we know Ole Miss's offensive line has been prone to pressure this season. Can Georgia ramp the pressure up again and give Jackson Dart some problems in the passing game? Alabama at LSU is also this weekend, man. I can't wait for this game. One, I always love this matchup. Two, I especially love this matchup when it's played at night. Now, I look at where LSU is incredible. That's throwing the football. Their wide receivers, their quarterback, really accurate, really explosive, create a lot of problems for you. I look at Alabama, the secondary has been the biggest question mark. Now, do I think that secondary is improving? Yeah, I do. I think across the board, Alabama's getting better play on the defensive side of the football. Now, is it good enough to shut LSU down? Probably not. So that means Alabama's offense is going to have to take advantage of a defense in LSU that is also really improved. And LSU, the last 2 weeks since they've had a bye week, they've been told, I'm sure, by their defensive coordinator, hey, quarterback's legs have hurt you this year. Quarterback's legs have killed LSU. They're giving up 6 yards per carry a quarterback run game. Well, guess who's coming into town? Jalen Milroe, a guy that can run the football. So we have a ridiculously good month of college football coming, and it kicks off this weekend with some big-time matchups in the Southeastern Conference. Takeaway number 10. Here's our rankings. We do our top 15. It's always our 10th takeaway. We're not going to do this every single week from this point forward because we have the College Football Playoff Committee's rankings that will come out starting tomorrow, I might add. So hopefully everybody, I know it's election night. I hope those of you that are watching us, if you got your election coverage on television, that's fine. We will still be on the air on ESPN. So if you want to flip over to us and take a peek at what the committee's doing with the rankings this year, maybe the new playoff format, the new playoff bracket, check that out. That'll be ESPN at 7 o'clock Eastern time. I'll be there alongside Reese Davis, Joey Galloway, and Booger McFarland. There will be a few other friends that will join the show as well. We will also be here with you at Always College Football. We'll tape it right after I get off the air for the College Football Playoff show. So we'll have that up and out to you as soon as humanly possible. So we look forward to that. But here's our rankings right now. Here's how it should be. Oregon should be number 1. And honestly, there should be a gap there. And I wonder if the College Football Playoff Committee chair will acknowledge that there is a bit of a gap right now between Oregon and everybody else. They got the win against Ohio State. They also have the win against Boise. 2 really good wins, a handful of others that are pretty good as well. Oregon's your number 1 team, no questions asked. Ohio State is number 2. You got the win against Penn State this weekend on the road, but you also have a win against a 6-3 Iowa team that's getting better and better and better as the weeks go along. So Ohio State sits at number 2. Number 3, the Georgia Bulldogs. You have a win at Texas, but their win against Clemson took a pretty considerable hit this weekend with Clemson losing to the Louisville Cardinals. So Georgia drops from 2 to 3 in my book this weekend. Miami is up to number 4. Miami does have a ranked win now over Louisville. That's, I think, a pretty good resume booster right now. So a ranked win over Louisville, I'm valuing the win over Louisville more than I'm valuing a win over Vanderbilt, which is why Miami's at number 4, Texas is at number 5. Texas, they do have a ranked win over the Vanderbilt Commodores. Their other 2 wins, Michigan, Oklahoma, they're 5 and 4 each. So Texas's schedule certainly leaves something to be desired. But the win over Vanderbilt, as crazy as it sounds, that's their biggest resume booster here at the moment. Tennessee is at number 6. Their win against Bama. That's all you really need. I know people will look at their first half performance and their inconsistencies offensively, but look at their defense, look at how they play on that side of the ball, and look at the win against Alabama. That's a pretty dang good resume booster. Not sure what else you need. At number 7, I have Indiana. They've scored 40 plus in 7 straight games. All right. That's pretty good. Yes, none of their wins are really all that impressive right now, but it's not with Indiana who they beat. It's more how they beat them. And their schedule will strengthen as the season moves along. They have their chances. They have plenty of meat left on the bone. They still have Michigan. They still have at Ohio State. So Indiana, full control of their own destiny. I think they could even lose one and still comfortably be inside the top 12 of the college football playoff committee. I'm fascinated to see where they put Indiana this week. It's going to be a really interesting thing to take a peek at. Another team I can't wait to see where they're ranked, but I have them at 8, is BYU. They beat SMU. SMU's 8-1 right now and might win the ACC. They also beat 7-2 Kansas State. And while Kansas State took the L this week, BYU beat them convincingly by 29 points, I believe, and forced 1 million turnovers in the process. So that SMU win continues to really bolster BYU's resume with how they've fared. At number 9, biggest dropper of the weekend, that would be Penn State. Illinois and Wisconsin, those are their best wins. Both took significant hits this past weekend. They don't really have a ranked win. They don't really have a marquee victory right now. And their loss this past weekend, I don't care if it's close. Like I've always said, good losses, there's no such thing as good losses to me. They're all kind of the same. So Penn State, they drop, I had them at 3, have now dropped them all the way to 9 because their 2 biggest wins this year both took hits this past weekend. At number 10, it's Notre Dame. They have 2 ranked wins, one over Louisville, one over Texas A&M. Those teams are 6-3 and 7-2 respectively. So Notre Dame, a bit of a hit this weekend though, because A&M, that win doesn't look quite as good, but the win for Louisville against Clemson balances it out and gives Notre Dame a slight push up the rankings just a hair. Alabama's at 11. They have a win over Georgia, who's 7-1. That's kind of all you need. They also have a win over Mizzou, who is 6-2. But like you guys, I'm not really that sold on Missouri, but you got to acknowledge the record to an extent. Win over Mizzou's fine. They won convincingly. The other thing that Alabama also has is a win over South Carolina. South Carolina's win against Texas A&M actually benefits Alabama as well. I think South Carolina probably should be in the top 25. They're not. But either way, they now have another pretty decent win on their resume because of what South Carolina achieved this weekend. At number 12, it's SMU. They have 2 good wins. Win over 7-1 Pitt, a win over 6-3 Louisville. And if you want to add a 6-3 Duke team to that list as well, you can. I think the Louisville win is their best win, but the Pitt win was so convincing, you got to feel pretty good about that. We're going to find out all we need to know about SMU here at some point in the future. I'm beginning to think the ACC is probably a 1-bid league, but in the event in which SMU beats an undefeated Miami in the ACC title game, I could see both teams getting in. Obviously the champion, but I could see Miami getting in as a potential at-large. At number 13, it's Texas A&M. They have a win over LSU, so they have to have the head-to-head against the Bayou Bengals. They also have a win over 6-2 Missouri, but I've already told you, I'm not giving you a ton of bonus points for beating Mizzou right now. But the win over LSU is a good one, and one that allows A&M to sit at 13. Right behind them, it is LSU. They have a win over Ole Miss. They also have a win at South Carolina. And I think South Carolina, like I said a moment ago, should probably be in the top 25. So a win over Ole Miss and a win over South Carolina has LSU in at 14, one behind A&M, who beat them head-to-head. Speaking of head-to-heads, LSU's at 14. Guess who I have at 15? That would be Ole Miss. They throttled South Carolina at South Carolina, and that is their best win of the season. But big opportunity lies this weekend with the Georgia Bulldogs coming to town. I think Ole Miss might be the most underrated team right now. Not based on resume, because I don't think their resume is very good. The South Carolina win's a great one, especially with what South Carolina did this weekend. But I think this team has a really high ceiling. I think they can go and play and potentially knock off just about anyone. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Continue to encourage all of you to like, rate, and subscribe to the show, wherever you get the show. Also, would kindly ask you to go and subscribe to the ESPN College Football YouTube page. Hit that thumbs up button if you're there already. And you can also always tweet and follow the show at Always CFB on any of your social media accounts. For all of us here at Always College Football, we'll be back with you in a couple days, talk a little college football playoff committee rankings. But until then, for Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have a tremendous day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.